Okay, hi. My name is Brandon, and for years I've been known in the demo scene as Syphus. That's one of a few names, but the one I've had the longest since the very early 2000s. I've been making Amiga music since some time in the 90s. I didn't feel confident enough to share any of it until the 2000s, and I released a lot of music online before MP3 was a thing. I entered music in competitions at demo parties, and these are all things we'd talk about. I shared mods, music modules, rather than MP3s and WAVs. We'll talk about that as well. And it was fun. And then Chiptune got big again, I guess for the second time for a lot of people of a certain age, but the first time for millions more in about early to mid 2000s. So suddenly the stuff I'd been doing in my bedroom to an audience of hardly anybody was getting an audience, and we had fun for a few years doing that, touring in the UK with lots of cool people, like Saber Pulse, who you may know, you should know, Firebrand Boy, Yusuke and Maru, Random, lots of other people. I did a Blip Fest in New York, that was fun, 2008. And lots of one-off gigs in the UK and a couple in Europe. Played at some demo parties. And now it's 2019 and I'm old and I've got kids, and that's grand, but I thought it would be nice to get the Amigas out, and I do it once in a while, but I thought it would be pretty cool now that actually streaming is something that people watch, because I streamed Amiga stuff like in about 2002 or something, and it was like 1 frame per second and there was nobody watching. It felt cool and futuristic, but like you can be sufficiently ahead of the curve that it's not even remotely cool. You just have to sit and wait for 10-15 years until the world catches up. And it caught up and it's overtaken me, and I haven't really got a clue what I'm doing. On Twitch, I don't get a great deal of time to watch streamers, except for Boof, who is somebody who you probably know of if you're interested in particularly Amiga gaming. She's a composer as well. And she's always said nice things about my music, and yeah, so it's good that there are people, and I gather that there are other people doing Amiga streams as well. That's cool. Long plays, playthroughs, that kind of thing. I'm sure there are other people doing tracking things, and I haven't really invested a lot of time in seeing who's doing what yet, but I will do. And what I want to do with this is a series of sort of tutorials. I don't want to be too didactic. I don't want to be gatekeepery or retro fetishistic or go on tediously about the old days. I mean, I will do a bit of that, but hopefully I mean well, and hopefully that will come across. In my early 20s, I was probably a bit more gatekeepery, especially when people were whipping out Game Boys and going, ooh, and like honestly, I was jealous that they had something they could put in their pocket and hold in their hand and make awesome sounds with, when I had to lug this thing about with a little LCD screen, which at the time was very, very bad. It looked awesome. It had a cuddly giraffe shape and legs and head, but was very poor quality. And I had my live setup was an Amiga, usually this Amiga 600, which is the Amiga 600 that my brother and I got for Christmas in '92, I think. Before that, I'd played on a lot of my cousin's A500 Plus and any other Amiga I could get my hands on. So this has been with me for a long time. It's been around the world with me. It has been swab tested for explosives in lots of international airports because they really don't like the look of this thing. Even people who you would have thought were old enough to recognize Commodore, but some of my Amigas are a bit more tricked out and scare security people. But yeah, this has had a tough paper round, and it's still going. So yeah, in the course of doing what I hope will be interesting tutorial videos, some of them will be kind of dissections of tunes, either mine or maybe other people's, to guide you through the workflow. And workflow with Protracker is not a stable, static, reliable thing. There are things that don't do what you expect them to do. There are inconsistencies in the program. Most versions of most of these trackers were written by kids, by teenagers, by crazy smart assembly programmers in the demo scene in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. And it's amazing. I mean, I'm not a great programmer. I'm terrible at assembly. When I look at that code, man, some of it's amazing what it does when you consider the amount of time it was done in. There's some stuff that you will only ever manage to do in your life if you have a couple of teenage years with nothing else to do but do what you want to do. You don't get that chance in your life usually. But as a result, there are a lot of things that don't go to plan. While I was firing this up before, I was reminded of a good one which has survived even into this recent fix of this version of Protracker, which is if you click on something, if you click on a module to load and it's not really a module and it says, "Are you sure?" and you say no, it loads it anyway and ruins everything. So that's fun. So a lot of it will be gotchas like that, and some of it will be in fact, I have a little notepad here with the kind of things I want to do. It says intro, what this is. You know what an Amiga is, I think, or else you wouldn't be here probably. If not, I'll cover that quickly in a future stream or video. What you're seeing on screen, this should be clear. This is the Amiga. This is my advanced capture card thing. There we go. That's one of the a monitor that actually syncs to the Amiga without a converter box. They're quite rare now, sadly. But I'll talk about that kind of thing. I'll talk about how you can get hardware going if you have hardware and you want to use it. If you're not quite there yet with the flow of being able to see things and hear things out of it, how I think you should set it up, other ways you could set it up, that kind of thing. And I might show you a bit around Workbench and the Amiga generally from the perspective of a musician. So my Amigas get a lot of use, but not the kind of use, not the kind of day-to-day computer use that a lot of people still like to use Amigas for. Some people have them playing MP3s and all sorts of things. You can trick out your Amiga in all sorts of ways. Some of mine are, some aren't. But generally, what I switch these on for is writing music, and they've just got loads of trackers and loads of tunes on them. So we'll go through a few different trackers. I'll explain in even more detail why I think Protracker is really cool, and I will not denigrate any other kind of tracker, because there are other trackers that are very cool, like Octamed, and people really love Octamed, and some people who love Octamed like to fight with people who love Protracker and vice versa, which is ludicrous. I'm not going to cover Octamed because I don't know what the hell I'm doing in Octamed. It's awesome, and I have next to no experience in it, and I hope somebody will do that. Amiga Junglism is a fantastic Octamed user, makes jungle on Amiga. Ask him, maybe he'll do some tutorials on using Octamed. It does a lot of the same things, does a lot of different things really well. Awesome. I'm not qualified to do that. We'll be talking about, as well as hardware, talking about how to emulate this stuff, and that is totally legit. I'm not a hardware purist or anything like that. I use emulations or modern ports of Protracker quite a bit, and I would rather people used it, had fun, made music, than fixated on hardware, which is inflated in price massively, especially recently. While I've not been looking, I turned back and had a glance at eBay, and Jesus, some of the prices. Anyway, we'll talk about getting sounds in. We'll start off doing it the rough and dirty way, the noisy way. Later on, I'll talk about how you can maximize the quality and reduce the noise floor to get the cleanest sound possible. Having said that, a whole big thing, which I'll spend time talking about, is the compromises you have to make if you're going to enjoy this or get into it. The biggest compromise is, can you deal with 11025 hertz 8-bit audio? Can you deal with your high quality samples being smashed down with a lot of the high frequencies taken out and the bass distorting and the noise floor through the roof and all that kind of stuff? If you can, then great. That means you love the kind of sound that the Amiga kicks out, and you learn how to work with that noise. Hide it sometimes, make the most of it other times. Sometimes you get this 8-bit digital crunch that is what I feel when I hear that from an Amiga module is what people who love the old Akai MPCs feel about the 1000s. Is it the 1000 or 2000 XL? The 12-bit thing going on there is there's a similar level of affection, and it's irrational. And I'll point out now, my day job is I'm a sound recordist for film and TV, audio post engineer, and I also do sound and music for video games. So my day job is recording things very high quality with as little noise as possible. And if that's your day job, then it's really fun to have your spare time taken up with noisy 8-bit sources and weird 50k hums coming from the mains and DC bias offsets and that kind of thing. It's different. It's nostalgic, but it's always fun to do something new with a nostalgic workflow that you're so used to. I will talk about getting notes in, making those notes, make a sound, going through the effects that are available. One of my favorite bits is talking about the tricks that we use, that trackers use to make this hardware do things it shouldn't. Even if it's emulated, what you have is a set of limitations that you decide to work within. Now, I'm a composer. I've worked on a number of games. I've worked on BBC radio drama. I've written scores. I can't get started on anything unless I set myself a few limitations, whether it's instrumentation. Like I'll say, well, I'm going to do this on one violin, one frame drum, and 2 vocalists. As you'll know if you've worked on a modern DAW and you've downloaded loads of free VST plugins and stuff, you open that up and you think, shit, that's a vast landscape of possibility. I don't know where to start. So working with the limitations is it drives innovation, because you try to work around them without breaking them. In some cases you can't break them. Back in the 90s we couldn't break the limitations in this machine. It has 4 voices, it has no DSP, no effects, sends, routing, anything like that. It doesn't really have proper stereo, and I'll talk about that at a later date, because it's a big bugbear, not a bugbear. Long story short, I think you should always be working in mono and listening in mono, because the stereo situation on the Amiga, with everything with 2 channels panned hard left and 2 panned hard right, is not. that's not like a feature. That's a blunder, and we should pretend it never happened. That's the only point on which I'm going to be some kind of fundamentalist. But yeah, that it's a bit like the compromise of the sound quality and stuff like that. You find the limitations, you work within them, and you see what you can do. And there is a community of people who do that and who learn from each other. That's always been the way. Lots of the tricks I've learned from downloading other musicians' mods from BBSs in the 90s and opening them up, because a module is its own project file. It has the samples in and it has the note data, and you open it up and there's usually a message to whoever's listening in the text of the sample names, and excuse me, you can learn those tricks. You hear something, you think, shit, that should not be possible. How is that possible? This sounds like there are 6 voices going in here. What's going on? You open it up, you unpack it, you find out how they did it, and then maybe you'll be the person who moves the state of the art a bit further. Now, okay, after almost 30 years, a lot of these tricks have been rinsed and found out, but it's no less fun to discover a trick yourself, or to hear something and think, how are they doing that? And then even without seeing that module, to figure it out and replicate it yourself. That's cool. I'd like to do sessions where we look at the anatomy of different styles. So chiptune, we'll talk about chiptune, not least because the term chiptune was invented in about 89 or 90 by Amiga musicians to describe a kind of tune that they were writing, which was supposed to emulate the C64 sounds, the SID sounds that they remembered from their youth. So again, when I was much younger, I'd be going like, oh, chiptunes, actually, it's only Amiga, it's chiptunes. No, hey, it's all chiptune. But as a piece of terminology, when you say chiptune on the Amiga, in that context, you're talking about an Amiga Protracking module that uses tiny, tiny samples that recreate the sound of chips. So even in 1990, it was a retro thing, because it was looking back to 83, 84. So doskpop is a whole area and style, which I'll cover. It's a very late 80s, early 90s. Now that needs a whole section to talk about Lizard King and all of that stuff. That's great fun. We'll talk about drum and bass, jungle, all sorts of other styles that people have over the years used Amigas to create. Gabba, lots and lots of Gabba. Because what Protracker is, I'll fire it up again. What Protracker is a fantastic sampler, essentially. If you don't care that much about the quality of each sample, I mean, yeah, sure, you can use Octamed, or you can use an Atari to drive a sampler which plays samples back at much higher quality, and these things have rock solid timing. But what this is, if you don't mind having a slightly rough kick drum, is they're really cool samplers with lots of tricks you can do, and a fairly easy interface once you get the hang of it. And that's why I've got the camera on the keyboard, because I don't know how much help it'll be, but learning that muscle memory for a lot of these key combos and key controls is important, although I forget a lot of them a lot of the time, and I was looking through the documentation a few days ago and discovered features that I never knew 2.3D had, because it's that easy to just miss something. It's got an undo. That might be a new thing. I'll talk about versions and who's fixed things and bolted things on and changed things and added things. I'll get onto that. And we'll do a song. We'll do more than one song. We'll talk about speed and BPM, talk about arranging the patterns into a composition, and we'll talk about, I would like to take questions from people, if people have suggestions for themes that we could cover or artists we could focus on. I have a few of my favorites that I'll be focusing on, and I'm going to see if I can, I said we'd talk about emulators at some point. We will do that. Higher quality samples, that's a whole area. One thing I'll do as much as I can is point you towards resources that are really handy. People who have gone into depth on one of the topics that we're covering. So people like Hoffman, there are tools that exist that can help with creating samples, converting samples from modern formats into formats that Protracker can understand. I made a tool that can do that, and I'll point you towards that. It's a free tool. Customizing Protracker if you want it. Mine looks pretty awesome, I think you'll agree. I hacked the bejesus out of it. It took ages because I don't know what I'm doing in assembly, but the source for this is open, so if you know what you're doing in assembly language, you can go in and try and untangle some of that 25-year-old, 30-year-old source. We'll look at some weird and exotic trackers, and we'll look at AHX as well, which, have I got it on here? It runs like a dog on the 600, but I'll run it on the 1200. AHX is the other tracker that I toured with a lot, and that is specifically a chip tracker. It doesn't use samples. It is designed to sound like a 4-channel SID, but it's got a feel of its own. That's great. We'll look at that if people are into it. Even if they're not, I'm going to do it anyway. And I'll try and keep my meandering accent under control. I hope that people can understand me. I hope that you'll be patient with an old man trying to use Twitch, because when I turn it on and things happen that I don't understand and it makes noises that I'm not comfortable with, and things happen on the screen and I feel 1,000 years old, but I'm going to do my best to figure out what's going on. And yeah, I guess I'll talk about getting samples in, because that's a big deal. Like, you've got to get them from somewhere. We'll talk about that. If I'm using an emulator and I just want to batch produce a whole bunch of samples, I'll usually open something like Ableton Live and make a bunch of pads. I've got some projects called Pad Maker. I open them up and I just make a lot of pads or a lot of bass synths, and I just batch them out and I convert them. Or stuff like this, which is the QY70, which is a very neat battery-powered late 90s workstation, or I think that's what they call them, the Yamaha. It's got a general MIDI module, but it's got some pretty good sounds. That's good for whipping stuff up in a hurry. I did a test run at making a tune, and I think it was on this machine, and got a bunch of nice sounds out of it straight off. They're pretty dirty, but these kinds of sounds, very workstation-y sounds from the past. And another big deal about this is it doesn't stop with you just loading a sample in. There's a lot of manipulation you can do to change those samples and to juggle them around, to pack them in to the limited space you have available. This thing's only got 2 megabytes of RAM, and that's expanded. It's fully expanded. by default it came with 1. The Amiga 500 came with half a meg of RAM. So your tunes would be limited in size by how much space you had. And yeah, lots of the tricks are, again, those limitations that you kind of subscribe to when you get into this. A lot of those tricks are about saving space. There's a kick drum that I got from a Dance 909 style kit on here. Clap. There's a chip sample that I'll talk about how I made that later. That's just a few seconds of messing about to that's just one of those orchestral samples with volume commands that shift the volume up and down over time. A couple of commands explained and you'll be making stuff that sounds and feels like music, and then it's pretty easy to go from there. So we'll have fun with that. I'll have fun. Maybe somebody else will have fun as well. All sorts of things to be done. Okay, what do people say on Twitch? You don't say like and subscribe, that's a YouTube thing, isn't it? Maybe you do say subscribe. I don't know, I'm not bothered. Like, I'll run the streams probably at weekends if I'm not putting the kids to bed. It's the kind of thing we have to. This is why I don't see many people stream. People stream usually at bedtime. Even a company I do some work for, a games company, when they stream, it usually is right on the nose of bedtime. And they've pushed it later every year. My kids go to bed later every year, so it's not ideal for me, but that's just me. I'll see what works and try and get into a good habit. I better stop talking and go to bed. Thank you. Hope we get to do some protracking. Bye bye.